So one of the things that people often say is follow your instincts or follow your gut. And what's complicated about this is that our instincts and our gut knowing has a lot of really valuable information. So assuming that you weren't raised in a really crazy family, so if you were raised by mentally ill people, your natural instincts will have been disrupted because it's not useful to have a child being told by her instincts, get away from dad, he's an alcoholic, he's nuts, if you're stuck in that situation. But assuming that you had a relatively safe childhood, our instincts have really good information about people. They'll register that someone's mentally ill or unsafe or unpredictable, picking up cues that we're not really aware of, and that's hugely useful information in terms of people that we're dealing with. It's a little harder if your instincts were disruptive. Personally, one of my beliefs is one of the reasons that people who were abused as children are often, abused as adults, more likely to be in those kind of relationships. There are a whole variety of reasons for that. But one of them is that disruption to the natural instinct process. So assuming that you have normal instincts, they can have some really valuable information. But the flip side is, you've probably also heard the phrase, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And when I see somebody doing that, usually I think there are a couple of things in play. One of them is that they're so hungry for a certain need to be met that they can go into magical thinking about something that feels like they could tell themselves a story that the need might be met, like a relationship where someone is very eloquent in how passionately they'll be there for the other person, but maybe don't have the life skills to show up. But the longing to believe that can really turn someone's head if they're really hungry for a certain need. But a lot of times that thing where we keep doing ineffectual things comes out of an instinctual need for safety, and some of our instincts messages are really good, and some of them are really confusing. And there's so much identification with ourselves as our mental body that I find that most people don't have a lot of really good tools for understanding what their instincts are telling them so that they can consciously decipher the message and find out if it's relevant, if it's good information that will help them and support them in making good choices. So if you imagine that you could draw a plus sign to create 4 quadrants, we have the mental aspect of human experience, the mind. We have the physical aspect, the physical body and the physical experience. We have the emotional experience of being human, and then there's the energetic or spiritual experience. And in our society, we're hugely biased toward the mental experience. We all have, incredibly developed and trained minds, but we don't necessarily get trained to listen to our body, even in the sense of like, hey, how do you feel in your body when someone says that to you or you have this experience? And we don't have a society that deals very well with emotionality. We have a lot of, actually a society with a lot of numbing strategies to be able to tune out what's going on in our body. And so we also, so having emotions that are developed where we don't know how to deal with our emotions, in fact we avoid them, people don't have a lot of mastery with dealing with that experience unless they've done a lot of work and sort of overcome their cultural heritage, or they lucked out and had a family that was really good at dealing with emotions. And then when we come to the spiritual or the energetic body, our knowledge is so small, unless you're really a geek about these kind of things and really pursue some form of training. And then even then, not having this sort of basic reference, it can be really confusing to support, like, what kind of practitioners are really in integrity, what information is really of value, because we don't have the kind of development of our spiritual and energetic intuition in the same way. And so in navigating through all of these things, a lot of us have realized that relying on just our head to make choices is not particularly viable. So you'll either follow your heart or follow your gut or follow your intuition. And we all have these experiences where we're like intuitively we got the message or the guidance or the knowing that we needed to, not do this thing or remember to grab your keys or whatever else, and we didn't listen. And so we have sort of that experience of the bad consequences of not listening, but not necessarily the skill of, how do I really make sense of the more subtle voices that happen inside of me? And when it comes to our instincts, like I said, can have really good information about situations and people that don't feel right. Like if somebody has a hidden agenda or they're being manipulative, our instincts will go, wow, something doesn't feel right. And assuming that we're present with ourselves and we're not so enticed by what the person is promising that we ignore that deeper feeling. And, scam artists who part people from vast quantities of their money, just sort until they find people who are so enamored of the fantasy, for example, of making a lot of money that they'll invest things unwisely. And that's where pyramid schemes, Ponzi schemes end up happening. But putting that part of it, aside, our instincts also have some really terrible information for us. So, for example, as a woman who has a sexual experience with a man, our instincts have no idea that we have birth control. They're totally unaware of the modern world. They're stuck back in hunter-gatherer times, and so if a woman has sex with a man and she's still in her fertile years, her instincts will tell her that she might be pregnant, and if he goes away, she and her baby could die. It's completely unsafe. Her very life, her very survival depends on how he feels about her the next day. And so it's very confusing for both men and women that a woman can go into a sexual experience going, hey, no strings attached, casual, this will be fine, and then the next day she wants to cling to him like Velcro. And as a woman, I've been certainly very frustrated when I've been gone from self-possessed and present in my life to checking my phone every 2 minutes to see if the fellow has texted. And I think men get really confused when women say one thing and then there's another reaction. And so for me, it was a huge game changer to realize how potent oxytocin is and be able to go, honey, it's just your hormones. I hear this incredible, compelling need to sustain connection with this person, and it's visceral. I really, really, really feel that way. And yet I know what it is, and so I can just, make sure I get extra exercise and drink lots of water and, manage that now that I know what it is, now that I know what my instincts are telling me, why they're telling me that, and how to take care of myself. And there are a lot of things like that. One of the things, if I go back to my 20s, one of the things that cued me that I should really get into therapy and I should really do my work was this, in some ways very beautiful relationship I had, but my first serious love, I was with this fellow for 7 years, and neither of us had really good models for relating to another human being. So we were making it up as we went along, and a lot of instincts were running the show. And so I remember having these epic arguments with him where we'd be arguing for hours and hours and hours. One of the stupidest ones was we were arguing about whether the light between the green light and the red light and the stop sign or the stoplight was yellow or orange. And we were just going at it hammer and tongs. And it was all about perception and being right and being heard and these underlying needs that we were trying to meet in a disastrous way. And at the time, my fear of abandonment was so intense that we were both in therapy. Like, we knew this was nuts. We weren't missing the fact that this was, not very healthy behavior. But the therapist, of course, made the sensible suggestion that, we take a 15-minute time out when we got really dug in and both go to our separate corners and calm down. And that was so scary to me that when this man would say, look, let's take the 15-minute time out, like the therapist said, I would actually escalate the energy to leaving the relationship if he did this thing. And I remember being in this position where there's this voice in the back of my mind going, Katie, don't say that. Katie, don't do that. Katie, this is a really bad idea. And then I would witness the thing coming out of my mouth anyway. And there was it was a lot of pain and a lot of frustration. And, first of all, I'm so happy that I got healthier, and that was a real motivating factor for me. And the other part of it was recognizing how primal and potent the instincts are. So the thing where people will argue to be right, even though we have all these experiences that telling someone I'm right and you're wrong does not build connection. And a lot of times we're looking to build connection and to be heard and to be seen, and telling someone that they're wrong and you're right is like the worst way to go about that. And yet, I find myself really having to fight the impulse to open my mouth and say something that I know is only going to create more distance, because there's this illusion that that it would be helpful. And the abandonment thing, when a man really needs, anyone, I shouldn't say man, I should say male or female, when anyone really needs to get away from a situation, like they're too angry, they're too upset, they're too triggered, and they want to do the right thing, which is go calm themselves down and then come back when they can be more present and compassionate and a better version of themselves, the fear that gets stirred up is really a primal thing, and as a woman, it's really helpful for me to be aware that my instincts will tell me that my survival depends on whether a man is with me, so that him going away for 15 minutes or an hour or a day or needing a timeout terrifies my inner cave woman, because she believes that despite the fact that I've been self-supporting for my whole adult life, she's still back in you need a provider protector, and the world is hostile, and if he goes away angry, he might not come back, and there's an intensity that comes up that is super distracting and super unsettling and really, really hard to navigate. And so the whole listen to your gut when it tells you to run after a person and not let them have time because it's so scary to have things unresolved is not a good time to listen to your gut. It's not a good time to listen to your instincts. And it's very confusing. And so, likewise, the instruction, listen to your heart. The fact that we say that to each other has to do with recognizing that our head doesn't always get us there. We can, pretty much make anything make sense in our own mind, and even if it's absolutely crazy. And so we're like, well, what does your heart tell you? Well, what I would suggest about the heart and what fits with my training and what resonates. Pardon the interruption, I live above the fire station and the police station, so periodically sirens go off, so I wanted to keep that off the recording. So as I was saying about the heart, what resonates and what my training says is that the heart just wants to love. The heart is just, I love, I want to love, and what can be really painful about that is when we start telling the heart, no, you can't love this person, they cheated on you, they lied to you, they this, they that, the other thing. It really puts the heart in conflict, and what I would offer is, what if you gave your heart permission to just love people whether they were good, bad, right, wrong, participating well, but you let other parts of you make decisions about what healthy boundaries you had to have. So this would be the evolved place if you have someone in your life who, for example, is really addicted to drugs or alcohol and not safe to be around. It might be like, I can't have you in my home because you'll steal my stuff. It doesn't work. But if this were your child or this were somebody that you love deeply, you might, still say, but hey, I'll meet you for lunch anytime you want. I really love you. Or maybe if someone has a tendency to be verbally abusive, you could still really love them, but say, look, I can't talk to you. I can't be on the phone with you. And being able to hold both compassion and love, but self-care, involves listening to two different voices. So a lot of times we try to get everything sort of lined up. So we're like, wow, this person isn't healthy for me, so I need to harden my heart against them. And that's when we get into those really intense tensions. And I've seen a lot of clients that I've worked with, both men and women, who were deeply in love with either a really unhealthy person or someone whose goals and availability was just really different than would work for them. So, somebody who really needed, monogamy in a committed relationship, having someone who might care about them a lot and love having them around, but just wasn't available to, to be in a monogamous relationship. And, a lot of suffering that follows, and that, sort of statement of listen to your heart is really confusing, because we could really, really love someone and the emotional price of being with them could be very unsustainable in relationship. And so for me, a lot of my journey has been to understand the underlying motivation, the underlying very positive motivation of every part of myself. My instincts are just trying to save my life. They just don't understand that I'm not going to be attacked by wild animals. Most likely, there's a vanishingly small chance that I could be at the zoo one day and the lion cage could be left open, and instead of, attacking a small child, the lion could come after me. But, probably not something I have to worry about in my daily life. But my instincts don't know that. They're just outdated. And so for me, being able to be in conversation with my instincts and understand the messages that they're telling me and where they're coming from is really useful. On one occasion, I had a man who I was seeing in community and who wanted to study with me, and I was so triggered with him. I was so uncomfortable. My instincts were just, blaring at me every time I got around him. And at the same time, he was really earnest. He had a deep longing for connection. He was really trying hard to find other ways of participating that were more successful. He was somewhat socially not adept. And for me, the moment that my instincts quieted down was when I realized that this man had some really deep anger at women. And it had to do with, the kind of mother he had had, past relationships that weren't successful, times when he'd felt not honored and not seen, and that was just the reality. And so for me, as someone who could then share space and community and work as a healing practitioner, my instincts calmed down because I could understand what was tripping them. A man who has deep anger at women, even if he thinks I'm the most amazing, wonderful woman in the world, my instincts, get really loud about that. But once I understood where it was coming from, I could reassure myself, look, there's no danger here. I'm not going to be alone with him. I'm not going to be in a position where he's going to attack me. That's not what's going to happen. Yes, this is an energy I don't much enjoy, but the primal safety fear was quieted. And so for me, a lot of my journey has been retraining my mind to be like a benevolent committee chair and to work on getting all these different voices inside of me into consensus. And to understand that when one voice gets really loud and intense and out of balance, or is sort of addictive about something and wants me to make a choice that isn't sustainable for the system as a whole. So when I'm working with clients about, addiction to drugs or alcohol or a relationship that's not very healthy, or they're having an affair with someone outside of their marriage or the other person's marriage, I prefer not to go the shaming route of you're bad. And I don't particularly like the phrase self-sabotaging behavior because it just seems to imply like a really deep illness and something that's really deeply wrong with the person. And what instead I would offer is that they're trying to meet a really important, precious need in a way that has too high a price for other parts. So you're meeting the need at expense of the other parts. And that's not sustainable, and they're, really big price tags. So somebody who wants to drink a lot of alcohol and they're meeting the underlying need of relaxing and quieting their mind and not being self-critical and fun and joy and playfulness and all these kind of things, or maybe trying to manage intensity of emotions that they don't have the tools or the skill for. Those are all really, really valid things that they're trying that have a positive desire, but it's very hard on the body and potentially on functioning in the rest of your life and all these other kinds of things. And so it would be really great to find ways to meet those needs that didn't include something that came with a price tag for other aspects of your life. So you can meet those needs without, potentially blowing up relationships or, shortening your life because of the damage to your physical body or, all of the other negative quality of life things, the hangover the next day, whatever it is. And so in terms of what I really like to offer is a lot of kindness and compassion and an ability to be able to hear all these different levels. And so I'm offering this as sort of a map to start to understand how to make sense of this idea when someone says, follow your heart, follow your instincts, follow your intuition. One thing I will offer about that intuitive voice, the sort of deep knowing that's very soul connected and that inner wisdom, is in order to hear that, we need to be really quiet inside of ourselves. And so when the waters are really choppy and tumultuous, we're having a lot of emotionality, we're having a lot of confusion, a lot of inner conflict, it's very hard to hear those voices in a nuanced way and to be able to make sense of what they're telling us. And so a lot of practices like meditation and exercise and, just things that quiet the mind and quiet the body and quiet the emotions so that we can hear that deep inner knowing are really, really helpful. And for big decisions in my life, I really like to make them by consensus. I like to have a consensus between something that works for my mind, something that works for my heart, something that works for the legitimate side of my instincts, so it's not trying to save me from, hunter-gatherer dangers, but modern, that's reasonable, something that feels good in my body when I think about going down that path. And so that's what I look for is an adeptness where I can use my mind to direct my attention to all these different levels of my being and to be able to check in with them and to understand what they're saying. So I don't just have a lot of really intense noise happening inside of me that I don't know how to make sense of. And this is something I'm really passionate about, so I love facilitating people in coming into that relationship. I have a 21-day program called the Instinct Intervention, and it's about coming into a healthier relationship with your instincts. So a lot of people walk around with the fight or flight activated all the time, and so on a really physiological level, that's taking over their experience. I just had an experience. It was kind of funny. I picked up a friend really late from the airport. We went to dinner. I parked in a parking garage, came back. It's all locked up for the night. I hadn't looked at the hours. I figured on a Friday night it would of course be open late. It wasn't. And so it wasn't a big deal. We, took Uber home, took Uber back the next day, got my car out. The attendant took pity on me and didn't charge me an arm and a leg for the fact that my car was there overnight. But that moment when I'd been thrown this unexpected curveball, when I was like, oh, my car is locked up, I can't get access. And it wasn't like I had anything, I was just going to go home and go to sleep. It wasn't like I had oh wow, I can't be somewhere that I need to be. And I'm a pretty bright, capable person, so, my figuring out the solution happened really, really quickly. But the process of going to my smartphone and trying to figure out the interface to call Uber, it took me several tries because my instincts were so agitated and I had enough adrenaline that I couldn't think straight. So processing the nuanced information of an app interface of, okay, how do I get my credit card in, and I needed to update, and, all those kind of things. My brain was just it was so hard, and I had this incredible sense of urgency, I had to make it happen really fast. And, it wasn't like anything was going anywhere. It wasn't like 5 minutes would have made a difference. But it just reminded me of how intense it can be and how really debilitating it can be when these instincts are kicked up. And so the 21-day program is about calming the baseline, being able to calm the instincts when they do get really super activated, but also really breaking down and understanding the voice of the instincts so that you can recognize if they have valid information or not, and recognize where they're coming from and what they're telling you, and being able to decipher the information, because the instincts don't talk to us in words, they talk to us in feelings, and it's the heart pounding, the knot in the stomach, and they're not very specific about what it is. And so our brain can run laps and laps and laps trying to figure out what the danger is. And a lot of people that I work with, the really terrifying thoughts that they deal with aren't related to, something real. So basically, a lot of times our instincts activate first, and then the brain goes in and tries to make sense of how agitated we are. And so it runs through all the scary things that could happen. Maybe I have cancer and I don't know it. What if I'm going to go into financial ruin? The boss frowned at me today. I could lose my job. I'd be out of the house. The neighbor was mad at me. What if they slash my tires? We come up with these crazy stories. The car being, locked up for the night, and it's totally locked up. Nobody could get in. My friend's luggage was in there, so if we could have, gotten to the car, even if we couldn't have gotten it out, we totally would have done so, at least to get his luggage. But I had this vision that the windows were going to be smashed. It kept coming into my mind. I'm like, well, what is that? And I just, called in the guys for extra protection. The car was fine, completely untouched. But our brain tries to come up with the story of what the scariest thing is. So a lot of people try to intervene at the level of the mind, thinking, oh, I think these crazy thoughts, when actually, if you calm the instincts down, the brain isn't going to try to justify how off-center we feel with a story that fits the level of fear and activation we have. So there's a lot to it, and my intent with this, even if you don't feel called to the intensity of a 21-day program, because it is a fairly intense, there's a lot of shamanic work, there are a lot of recordings, there's a lot of information. I'm hoping that this just helps you have a better map to understand some of the conflicting voices that are happening inside of you, so that it's easier to tune into the question of what part of me is talking and what positive intention does this part have, and is this part really have the ability to effectively pick a course of action. And so understanding that and starting to break down, and particularly understanding like what messages our instincts tell us, because I find that the instincts can often be the most confusing and disruptive, can really make a huge difference. So my name is Katie Weatherup, and I'm a shamanic practitioner in San Diego, and I hope that this recording has really supported you. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen.